He didn't understand why. One moment he was in his owner's arms, warm and safe. The next, he was left alone in a cold kennel, staring at the door that would never open for him again. Max, a chocolate Labrador puppy, sat quietly, his small body trembling, his eyes brimming with tears. What could make someone leave behind a puppy so young, so full of trust? And what did Max see in those final moments that made his cries echo with something deeper than sadness? The old car rattled as David parked it in the small lot outside the animal shelter. In the passenger seat, Max, an 8-week-old chocolate Labrador retriever puppy, poked his head out of the partially opened window. The breeze ruffled his soft brown fur, and his floppy ears twitched with curiosity. Max's hazel eyes sparkled with excitement, oblivious to the weight of the day ahead. David sat still for a moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. His gaze lingered on Max, who was wagging his tiny tail, eager for whatever adventure his owner had planned. David inhaled deeply, masking the crack in his composure. Finally, he reached over, lifting Max into his arms. The puppy squirmed playfully, licking David's chin, as if to say, "Where are we going, Dad?" David smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. The shelter doors swung open, and a faint smell of disinfectant and fur greeted them. Inside, the space was clean but stark, the fluorescent lighting casting pale shadows. Max's tail wagged furiously as David carried him to the reception desk, where a middle-aged woman in a green polo shirt greeted them warmly. "New intake?" she asked, her voice soft but practiced. David nodded. "Yes. I need to surrender him," he said, his voice tight. He carefully set Max on the counter while the receptionist handed him a clipboard. Max sat obediently on the counter, his small tail thumping softly as he looked up at David. He seemed to sense no change in the rhythm of his day, only the lingering scent of David's cologne and the faint hum of the air conditioning. David filled out the paperwork with shaky hands, avoiding eye contact with the receptionist. Each stroke of the pen felt heavier than the last. Finally, he set the clipboard down and looked at Max. "I'm sorry, buddy," he whispered, crouching to meet the puppy's curious gaze. "This is better for you. You'll be okay." Max tilted his head, as if listening intently, his trusting eyes locked on David's. For a moment, David hesitated. His hand reached out to scratch Max behind the ears one last time, but then he stood, turned, and walked away. Max padded after him as far as the leash tethered to the counter allowed. His paws clicked softly on the tile floor, his tail wagging faintly. When David passed through the glass doors and stepped outside, Max stopped, staring after him. The puppy sat still, his ears perking up as he watched David climb into the car. For a moment, hope shone in Max's hazel eyes. The engine started and the car pulled away. Max's tail wagged once, twice, then stilled. His head tilted as the car moved farther and farther away, disappearing down the road. And then it hit him. The wagging stopped entirely, replaced by trembling. His ears drooped, and his small body began to shake as a soft whimper escaped his lips. The realization dawned. David wasn't coming back. The staff member carefully carried Max to a small kennel near the back of the shelter. She set him gently inside, placing a worn blanket on the cold concrete floor. "Here you go, little guy," she said kindly. Max sniffed the blanket, his nose twitching. It smelled faintly of David, a faint comfort in the unfamiliar surroundings. He curled up on it, his tiny paws tucked under him, his tail wrapped around his side. For hours, Max lay still, his hazel eyes fixed on the kennel door. Each time it opened, he perked up, his ears standing alert as he watched the entrance with hopeful eyes. But it was never David. By the end of the day, Max stopped getting up. The hope in his eyes dimmed as exhaustion took over. Emma, a 25-year-old volunteer, entered the kennel area that evening to check on the new arrivals. She was petite, with auburn hair tied in a loose ponytail, and her green shelter t-shirt was wrinkled from a long day of work. As she passed Max's kennel, she paused. The small chocolate Labrador caught her attention immediately. His fur was sleek and shiny, but his eyes were dull, almost hollow, as he lay curled on the blanket. Emma crouched by the kennel, gently tapping her fingers against the bars. "Hey, little one," she said softly. Max lifted his head slightly, his ears twitching at her voice. Slowly he stood up and padded towards her, his steps hesitant but hopeful. "Oh, you're just a baby," Emma murmured. She reached her hand through the bars to scratch behind Max's ears. The puppy pressed against her touch, his small tail wagging faintly. As she rubbed his ears, her fingers brushed against the metal tag hanging from his collar. Emma turned it over, reading the name engraved on it. "Sammy," she read aloud, her brows furrowing. "Sammy, that's not your name, is it?" Max tilted his head, looking at her with his wide, innocent eyes. Emma's curiosity deepened. "Who is Sammy?" The shelter quieted down as night fell. Most of the other dogs settled into their kennels, their barks fading into soft snores. But Max remained awake. He lay curled on his blanket, his eyes fixed on the shadows that stretched across the concrete floor. Occasionally, he let out a soft whimper, his small body trembling. Emma, cleaning up in the main office, couldn't stop thinking about the puppy in the back. There was something about him, something in his sadness that didn't feel like ordinary abandonment. She leaned against the desk, staring at the name Sammy written in her notebook. Who is Sammy, she wondered again, and why does it feel like this little puppy is holding on to something more than just the scent of his owner? The first night in the shelter was cold and quiet. The faint hum of the air conditioning and the occasional bark from other dogs echoed through the dimly lit kennels. Max lay curled up on the old blanket, his nose buried in its folds, seeking the comfort of David's lingering scent. His hazel eyes remained open, staring at the kennel door as if waiting for something, or someone. As exhaustion finally overcame him, Max drifted into a restless sleep, the first dream. In the dream, Max wasn't in the kennel anymore. He was outside, running through a field of lush green grass. The sunlight bathed the world in golden warmth, and a gentle breeze tickled his ears. His little paws thudded against the soft earth as he chased after the sound of laughter. "Sammy, come here!" a boy's voice called out. Max skidded to a halt and looked up. Standing a short distance away was a boy, no older than 6, with curly blonde hair and a bright smile. The boy wore a white t-shirt and beige shorts, his arms outstretched as he beckoned Max forward. The laughter rang again, filling Max's tiny heart with joy. The puppy barked excitedly and ran toward the boy. His tail wagged furiously, and his small legs carried him faster and faster, the warmth of the boy's presence pulling him forward. But then the sunlight dimmed. The grass faded to grey, and the boy's figure became blurry, slipping further away. Max barked again, this time in panic, but the boy didn't respond. The laughter echoed faintly, disappearing into the cold void. Max jolted awake, his small body trembling. In the darkness of the kennel, Max scrambled to his feet, his paws scratched at the concrete floor, his head darting around as he searched for the boy from his dream. "Sammy!" he barked, the name escaping him in a soft, plaintive cry. His barking grew louder, the sound sharp against the quiet night. Emma, who had stayed late to organize files in the staff office, heard the noise. She put down her pen and walked quickly to the kennel area, her footsteps echoing in the hallway. When she reached Max's kennel, she saw him standing near the bars, his ears pinned back and his hazel eyes wide with fear. "Hey, little one," Emma said gently, crouching by the door. "What's wrong?" Max turned to her, his small body quivering. He let out another soft bark, then paced back and forth, his nails clicking on the floor. Emma reached through the bars, her hand resting on his head. "Shh, it's okay," she murmured, stroking his fur. "You're safe here." Max whimpered and leaned into her touch, but his gaze kept darting toward the door, as if expecting someone to walk through it. The next evening was no easier for Max. Though he had calmed down during the day, the loneliness crept back as night fell. Once again, he curled up on the blanket, his small frame shaking as he closed his eyes. The dream came quicker this time. He was back in the field, but the colors were muted, less vibrant than before. The boy appeared again, running ahead, his blonde curls bouncing with each step. "Sammy, over here!" the boy shouted, his voice carrying on the wind. Max barked and followed, his little legs pushing hard to catch up. But no matter how fast he ran, the boy stayed just out of reach. The edges of the dream blurred, and the boy's figure began to dissolve, leaving Max alone in the vast empty field. This time, when Max woke up, he didn't bark. He simply stared at the door, his eyes heavy with sadness. By the third night, Emma noticed a pattern. Max would stay restless during the day, staring out of his kennel with a vacant expression. At night, his soft whimpers would fill the air, followed by bursts of frantic barking. She decided to stay in the kennel area that evening, sitting quietly by Max's cage as he drifted into sleep. She watched him closely, her heart aching at the sight of his tiny body twitching and trembling in his dreams. "What are you dreaming about, little guy?" Emma whispered. When Max woke up with a start, Emma opened the kennel door and crouched down to comfort him. Max looked at her with those deep, hazel eyes, his tail wagging faintly, but the sadness didn't leave. Emma gently touched the tag on his collar again, her fingers brushing over the engraved name. "Sammy," she murmured. "Who is Sammy?" Max tilted his head, the familiar sound of the name stirring something in him. Emma couldn't ignore it anymore. She needed to know why this small puppy seemed so haunted. As the shelter quieted down for the night, Emma sat in the break room, staring at the name written on her notepad. Sammy. She couldn't shake the image of Max in his dream, the way he cried out as if chasing something or someone he couldn't reach. "There's something here," she muttered to herself, "and I'm going to figure it out." Meanwhile, back in the kennel, Max lay on his blanket once more. His tiny frame trembled, and his hazel eyes blinked slowly as he tried to stay awake. But sleep came for him anyway, pulling him back into the field, back to the boy with the golden curls. The sun was low on the horizon as Emma pulled into a quiet suburban neighborhood. The houses were older, nestled under the shade of large oaks and maples, their yards dotted with fallen leaves. Her destination, a modest white house at the end of the street, looked empty. The once vibrant garden was overgrown, and the windows were dark. Emma parked and stepped out of her car, clutching the paperwork she'd brought with her. The address, listed in Max's surrender form, belonged to David Carlson, the man who had left Max at the shelter. There was no sign of life, only silence as Emma approached the front door and knocked. No one answered. Emma tried peeking through a window, but the house was bare. Dust coated the windowsill, and the furniture inside was gone. She turned to leave, but an older man tending to his yard next door waved her over. "You're looking for the Carlsons?" he called, his voice gravelly but kind. Emma nodded. "Yes, I work at the animal shelter. David Carlson brought a puppy to us recently, and I'm trying to understand why." The man set down his rake and wiped his hands on his jeans. "They don't live here anymore. Moved out a couple of weeks ago. Couldn't bear to stay after what happened to Sammy." Emma's chest tightened. "Sammy?" The man nodded solemnly. "David's little brother. The family's youngest. There was an accident. Happened right behind the house." Emma leaned in, her heart heavy with anticipation. "What kind of accident?" The man sighed, his shoulders slumping. "It was about a month ago. Sammy was just a kid, 6 years old. Sweet boy, full of energy. He adored that puppy, Max. The dog was a gift from David, actually. He brought Max home one day, said it was the perfect companion for Sammy, and it was. The two of them were inseparable." Emma felt her stomach drop. "Max was Sammy's dog?" "Yep," the man confirmed. "Sammy named him and everything. You'd always see the two of them running around playing fetch or rolling in the grass. But one day, He paused, his voice growing strained. They were playing by the creek out back. Sammy loved throwing sticks for Max to fetch. The ground must have been wet because Sammy slipped and fell into the water. The current was strong that day. The man's voice faltered. David heard Max barking like crazy and ran out. He jumped in to save Sammy, but it was too late. He got to him, but the boy... Emma's throat tightened as tears pricked her eyes. He didn't make it. The man nodded, his face etched with sorrow. David pulled both of them out of the water. Max was holding onto Sammy's shirt with his tiny teeth, as if he was trying to pull him out too. After that, nothing was the same. Emma swallowed hard. What happened to the family? They were devastated, the man said. David blamed himself. He was the one who gave Sammy that dog, the one who was supposed to watch out for him. His parents couldn't stand to stay here anymore. The creek, the house, everything reminded them of Sammy. So they packed up and left. David stayed behind for a while, but it broke him to see Max. I think he felt guilty every time he looked at that dog. It wasn't Max's fault, of course, but grief. Grief makes you do strange things. Emma thanked the man and returned to her car, her thoughts racing. She now understood why David had brought Max to the shelter. The puppy wasn't just a reminder of Sammy, he was a symbol of the bond between the two brothers, and of the day that bond was tragically severed. David had been the one to bring Max into their lives, a gift for his little brother. He had seen the joy Max brought to Sammy, and he had been there in the worst moment, when that joy was replaced by unimaginable loss. Emma couldn't imagine the weight David must have carried. He had likely left Max at the shelter not out of cruelty, but because he couldn't bear the constant reminder of his own pain. When Emma arrived back at the shelter, the building was quiet, the day winding down. She made her way to Max's kennel, where the little chocolate Labrador lay curled on his blanket. His eyes opened as she approached, and his tail wagged faintly. "Hey, Max," she said softly, kneeling by the kennel door. "I found out more about you today." Max tilted his head, his hazel eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her heart ache. "You weren't just a dog to Sammy, were you?" Emma whispered. "You were his best friend. And David, he gave you to him because he loved him. You were part of their family." Max let out a soft whimper, pressing his nose against the bars. Emma reached through and stroked his fur, her fingers brushing over the tag on his collar. "You're carrying a lot, aren't you, little guy?" she said. "But I promise we'll figure this out. You're not alone anymore." That night, Emma sat in the shelter office, her notebook open in front of her. She wrote down everything the neighbor had told her, the story of Sammy and David. Max wasn't just another abandoned dog. He was a survivor, a living connection to a family torn apart by tragedy. And Emma knew she couldn't stop with just understanding his past. She had to help Max move forward, to find the love and joy that Sammy would have wanted for him. As she closed the notebook, Emma glanced toward the kennels. The faint sound of Max's soft breathing reached her ears, and she smiled sadly. "Tomorrow's a new day, Max," she whispered. "We'll find a way to heal." Emma couldn't stop thinking about David after what she had learned from his neighbor. His grief, his guilt, and his bond with Sammy all pointed to one truth. He hadn't abandoned Max out of cruelty. He had left the puppy because he couldn't bear the weight of his loss, but Max still carried the weight of that same grief. Emma couldn't let this story end without at least trying to reconnect the two. Emma tracked down David's new address through the shelter's records. It was a small apartment in the heart of the city. The area was quiet, tucked between rows of modest buildings with weathered brick facades. When she knocked on his door, it took a long moment before it opened. David appeared, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. He didn't look surprised to see her, more resigned, as if he had expected the past to come knocking eventually. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice flat. Emma held her hands up in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to judge you," she said. "I just want to talk about Max." At the sound of the name, David's jaw tightened, and he began to close the door. "I can't. Please, David," Emma interrupted. "I know what happened. I know about Sammy." The door froze halfway. David's shoulders slumped, and for a moment Emma thought he might let her in. Instead, he shook his head. "There's nothing to talk about," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Just leave it alone." And with that, he shut the door. The photo that changed everything. Emma didn't give up. She spent the next few days trying to find the right words, the right way to reach David. Finally, she decided to send him a picture. It was a photo she had taken of Max at the shelter. The little puppy was curled up on the blanket David had left behind, his tiny body relaxed for once, his hazel eyes closed in a rare moment of peace. The caption read, "He still waits for you." Emma sent the picture along with a short note, explaining what she had observed about Max, the dreams, the whimpers, the way the puppy still seemed to long for something he couldn't name. She didn't hear back right away. But 3 days later, David showed up at the shelter. Emma was in the kennel area when she heard the front door chime. She turned to see David standing in the lobby, his hands shoved into his jacket pockets, his face pale. "You said he still waits for me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma smiled gently. "He does. Come on." She led him to Max's kennel. The little chocolate Labrador was lying on his blanket, his ears perked slightly as he watched Emma approach. When he saw David standing behind her, something shifted. Max's head shot up, and for a moment he simply stared. Then his tail began to wag, slowly at first, then faster and faster. He barked once, then scrambled to his feet, pressing his tiny paws against the kennel door. David froze, his breath catching in his throat. "He remembers me," he whispered. Emma opened the kennel door, and Max bolted out, running straight to David. The puppy's barks were high-pitched and excited, his tail wagging so hard that his entire body swayed. David dropped to his knees, opening his arms. Max leapt into them, burying his nose into David's chest, licking his face with unrestrained joy. For a long moment David simply held him, his arms wrapped tightly around the little dog. His shoulders began to shake, and tears streamed down his face as he whispered, "I'm so sorry, buddy. I'm so sorry." Max whimpered softly, as if trying to comfort David. The puppy's warm, soft body seemed to melt the walls David had built around his heart. David pulled back slightly, cupping Max's small face in his hands. "Sammy loved you so much," he said, his voice trembling. "You were his best friend, and I know it wasn't your fault. You didn't do anything wrong." Max barked again, his hazel eyes bright with a mix of joy and relief. Emma watched from a distance, her heart swelling at the sight. The connection between David and Max was undeniable, and for the first time it felt like both of them could begin to heal. After spending time with Max, David agreed to take him home. It wasn't an easy decision. He still carried the weight of his grief, but seeing Max's unconditional love gave him the strength to try. As they walked out of the shelter together, David looked down at the little puppy, trotting happily by his side. "Let's make Sammy proud, okay?" he said softly. Max barked in response, his tail wagging furiously. For the first time in a long time, David smiled, a real smile, one that hinted at the possibility of hope. David pulled into the driveway of his small apartment. Max curled up in the passenger seat beside him. The puppy had fallen asleep during the ride, his soft chocolate fur glowing under the sunlight streaming through the window. David glanced at him, his heart swelling with a mix of emotions, grief, guilt, but also something new, hope. The first few days were harder than David had imagined. Every time Max bounded through the small apartment, his tail wagging or his nose sniffing at a corner, David was reminded of Sammy. The memories hit him like waves. Sammy's laughter, his small hands tossing sticks for Max, the way the boy would hug the puppy so tightly, it was as if they were one. David often found himself retreating to the couch, staring out the window, the ache in his chest feeling unbearable. But then Max would appear, climbing onto the couch and pressing his tiny paws against David's leg. His hazel eyes, so full of understanding, would lock onto David's, and for a moment the heaviness would lift. "Okay, buddy," David whispered one night, rubbing Max's soft ears. "Let's take this one day at a time." Max quickly settled into the routine of his new home. He'd follow David around the apartment, his little paws clicking on the hardwood floors. When David cooked dinner, Max would sit patiently by his feet, his tail swishing softly. In the evenings they would watch TV together, Max curled up beside David with his head resting on his lap. Caring for Max became David's anchor, feeding him, walking him, playing with him. These small acts of love began to fill the void left by Sammy's absence. Max wasn't just a puppy. He was a living reminder of the love that had once filled their family. Each time Max wagged his tail or barked excitedly at a new toy, David felt a spark of joy. Slowly, those sparks began to grow, warming the parts of his heart that had felt frozen since the accident. One sunny afternoon, David decided to take Max to the park for the first time. It was a quiet, sprawling green space with rolling hills and tall trees that swayed gently in the summer breeze. David unclipped Max's leash and watched as the little Labrador bolted into the open field. Max's ears flopped as he ran, his tail wagging furiously. He darted after a butterfly, barking happily, before tumbling onto the soft grass in a clumsy heap. David chuckled, a sound he hadn't heard from himself in what felt like years. He leaned against a nearby tree, watching Max explore. For a brief moment, the image of Sammy appeared in his mind, running through a field much like this one, Max chasing him with the same unbridled joy. The memory didn't bring pain this time. Instead, it brought warmth, like the embrace of an old friend. Max spotted David under the tree and came bounding back, a stick clamped proudly in his mouth. He dropped it at David's feet, wagging his tail expectantly. David picked up the stick and threw it into the open field. "Go get it, Max!" he called. The puppy raced after it, his tiny legs carrying him as fast as they could. The sun caught the shine of his chocolate fur, making him look almost golden in the light. As David watched Max retrieve the stick, a genuine smile spread across his face, the first true smile he'd felt in months. "Sammy would have loved this," he murmured to himself. Max returned, stick in mouth, and dropped it again with a triumphant bark. David knelt down, scratching the puppy behind the ears. "Good boy, Max," he said softly. For the first time, David felt something he thought he'd lost forever: peace. The days turned into weeks, and life with Max became David's new normal. The grief didn't disappear entirely. David knew it never would, but it no longer consumed him. Max had brought light back into his life, not by erasing the past, but by helping him carry it. With every wag of his tail and every joyful bark, Max reminded David that love and healing were still possible, even after unimaginable loss. On a warm summer evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, David stood on his balcony, watching Max play in the small yard below. The puppy darted through the grass, chasing fireflies that flickered like tiny stars. David leaned against the railing, his heart full. "Thank you, Max," he whispered, "and thank you, Sammy." Max looked up at him, his hazel eyes glowing in the golden light as if he understood. Together they had found a way to start again. In life, we all face moments of heartbreak, moments that leave us feeling lost and broken. David's journey with Max reminds us that even in the darkest times, love and compassion have the power to heal. Through Max's unwavering loyalty, David found a way to move forward, one step at a time. This story teaches us that God's blessings often come in unexpected forms, sometimes through the wagging tail of a loyal companion. As it says, "The Lord is close to the broken-hearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." So what do you think of Max's story? Have you ever experienced a moment where love, whether from an animal, a friend, or your faith, helped you through a difficult time. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so share them in the comments below. And as we close, let us pray. May God bless all those who are hurting and guide them to healing and hope, just as David and Max found their way back to the light. Amen.